Welcome to Chapter 41, EMS Response to Terrorism. So the definition of terrorism is any unlawful use of force or violence against persons, property, to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segments thereof, in furtherance of a political or social objective. And that's the definition that the FBI gives. Domestic terrorism, so this is a group or individuals whose terrorist activities are directed towards their own government or population. We can have environmental, anti-government militias, racial and hate groups, and groups with extreme political, religious, or other philosophies or beliefs. International terrorism, so groups or individuals whose terrorist attacks are foreign-based and are directed at other outside countries. The growing trend toward loosely organized international networks of terrorism. So there's several different types of terrorist events, and these can be kind of classified as or put into a mnemonic called CBRNE. So chemical, biologic, radiologic, nuclear, and explosive. These are also called weapons of mass destruction. So responders are often the principal targets of terrorist attacks, and our safety is the most important consideration when responding to potential terrorist incidents. So typically it's that secondary explosion after we've gone to assist that's going to be our main concern. So we want to identify the threat posed. So terrorists may deliberately target responders by using multiple or secondary devices, and that incident is the potential act of terrorism, is also a crime scene, so you got to be aware of that too. Recognizing auto signs may help protect against a secondary attack. So you want to look at the occupancy or location, the type of the event, the timing, and any kind of on-scene warning signs. So occupancy or location, symbolic and historic targets, public buildings, controversial businesses, and infrastructure systems. The type, so it can be explosions or incendiaries, incidents involving any kind of firearm, and non-trauma mass casualty incidents as well. Timing of the event, when are the times, when is the event, when did the event occur? So like national holidays, anniversary dates or previous attacks, incidents occurring in major public areas or at busy points of business. On-scene warning signs, unexplained patterns of illness or death, unexplained signs and symptoms of skin, eye, and airway irritation, and any kind of container that may appear out of place. Trace MP, so these are the harms that are posed by the threat, and each one of those CBRNE categories has one of these things, if not multiple of them. So thermal harm caused by either extreme heat or extreme cold. Radiological harm would be from your alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma rays, and these are generally produced by a nuclear event. Asphyxiation is caused by lack of oxygen in the atmosphere. Chemical harm by toxic or corrosive materials. Etiological harm caused by some type of disease. Medical harm caused by physical trauma, gunshots, bomb fragments, something like that. And then psychological harm, and that can result from any violent event. Time, distance, and shielding. So this typically occurs with radiation, although it can occur with hazardous material or a biological agent. execute rapid entries to perform reconnaissance or rescue. So time, distance, and shielding, again, is a more radiation type deal. So you want to minimize all of your time that you're in there to lessen the harm that's going to do. Distance, you want to maximize your distance from the hazard area or projected hazard area and follow any kind of recommended guidelines in the ERG. Shielding, you want to use appropriate shielding for specific hazards. It can be vehicles, buildings, fire protection clothing, hazmat suits, positive pressure self-contained breathing apparatus, or PPE. And then vaccinations against specific diseases as well. So chemical incidents, there's many classes of hazardous materials. They can be inhaled, ingested, absorbed, or injected, and can include industrial, chemical, or warfare type agents. So our trace MP, so the thermal harm from chemical incidents is reactions create heat, causes asphyxiation where we deplete the oxygen. In chemical harm, it has systemic effects to the body. Mechanical harm, it can cause weakened structures because of the corrosive chemicals. And then psychological harm is either secondary and either at the scene or sometime after the event. Self-protection, respiratory protection, protective clothing. Be aware of possible contamination from patients as well. A biological incident. So this presents as a focused emergency or public health emergency. If it's a focused emergency, we have the potential or actual point of origin that needs to be located. Attempts need to be made to prevent or minimize the damage and spread. If it's a public health emergency, we're going to see a sudden demand upon the public health infrastructure with no apparent explanation. Causative agents in a biological accident incident is bacteria, viruses, or toxins. So critical information to know about biological incidents would be that what is an exposure, so the dose or the concentration of the agent multiplied by time. So doses is the milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and the concentration is how many parts per million. There's 4 major routes of entry. So there's skin contact, ingestion, injection, and inhalation. And then there's contamination. So this is a material that is present where it does not belong. That material is present that is harmful to persons, animals, or the environment. Things that cannot be contaminated, or that can be contaminated, sorry. Hard and soft surfaces, skin and hair, and clothing. So exposure versus contamination. An exposure occurs when a substance is taken into the body through one of the routes of exposure. Permeation is the movement of a substance through a surface or on a molecular level through intact materials. So we want to remove clothing but preserve the dignity of the patient. Okay. So our trace MP for biological incidents, we have scene or clandestine laboratory for a chemical harm. Etiological harm would be agents classified as poisons. Mechanical harm is our explosives used to disperse agents, and our psychological harm is just even the thought can cause distress. Self-protection, so PPE and respiratory protection, get as much information as possible. Prioritize your protective measures, self-protection, buddy system, and availability of any kind of rapid intervention teams, and also civilian protection. Radiologic and nuclear incidents. So small nuclear devices such as suitcase bombs or shoe bombs stockpiled in foreign nations. Radiologic dispersion device or dirty bomb. These are more practical. They're difficult to detect because the radiation symptoms are delayed for hours or even days. And the sickness is treatable if it is detected early. Your trace MP for, your trace MP for radiologic and nuclear incidents. So thermal harm, you're going to have a nuclear explosion. Your radiological harm, you're going to have radiologic materials with an ongoing hazard as well. Chemical harm, the radiological substances are also chemical hazards. Your mechanical harm, you're going to have explosions, and then psychological harm is going to be either immediate or delayed. Self-protection, time, distance shielding, detecting equipment helps to determine the effectiveness of measures, and we want to assume dissemination of any kind of radiologic, biological, or chemical material, and follow decon procedures. Explosive incidents. So there's a wide variety of devices from small pipe bombs to large vehicle bombs. It may involve attacks on a fixed target or group of people, and it may be designed to disperse biologic, chemical, or radiologic materials. Our trace MP for explosive incidents. You're going to have heat of detonation from thermal harm. Asphyxiation, you're going to have the possibility of extremely dusty conditions. Chemical harm, you're going to have the result of an explosive reaction from chemicals present at the detonation site. Mechanical harm, you're going to see same thing as you would as a bombing accident. And then psychological harm, the patient's going to be stunned. Response that can last seconds or minutes, and then we may have a delayed form of PTSD. Self-protection. So responder needs both pre-blast and post-blast protection. Pre-blast would be operations occurring after written or verbal warning received, but before the explosion takes place. And then post-blast would be the operations occurring after at least one detonation. So dissemination and weaponization. So the respiratory route is the most effective. It's the most common means. Vast and delicate surface area in the lungs. There are various levels, sizes, and of the passageways into the lungs as well. Other routes could be ingestion, dermal, or human-to-human contact. Weaponization is most effective when targeted through the inhalation route. Particles 3 to 5 microns in diameter can easily pass through the respiratory system. Airborne dissemination can be created by applying energy to a material, so like an explosive or compressed air or something like that. So characteristics of CBRNE accident incidents, chemical agents, chemical agent considerations. So physical, they can be gaseous or liquid or solid. Vapor pressures and densities can vary across the spectrum. Volatility considerations, so they can have a low boiling point and a high vapor pressure point, and then they're going to evaporate more readily. This allows the agent to have a greater airborne release potential. So sufficiently stable to survive dissemination and transport to the site of action. And not all individuals of a species will react the same way. Route of entry can also influence the way the chemical will react on the body. Nerve agent poisonings. So there's some nerve agents out there that could occur, and we just use the sludge M mnemonic to kind of tell us the signs and symptoms of a nerve agent poisoning. So salivation, lacrimation, increased crying, or tears, urination, defecation, GI upset, emesis, and meiosis. Meiosis is the sweating. Choking agents, so predominantly respiratory, vesicating agents or blister agents. These cause chemical changes in the cells of exposed tissues. Cyanides are used to prevent the use of oxygen within the cells. Nerve agents, so these inhibit enzyme critical to proper nerve transmission, causing out of control parasympathetic nervous system. Those sludge signs and symptoms. Riot controlled agents, these are irritating materials and lacrimators. They're tear flow increasers. So patients are going to be crying. Microorganisms or toxins that can cause disease processes for biologic agents. So it could be a bacteria, it could be a virus, or it can be a toxin. Toxin is just that poisonous chemical produced or derived from a living organism. Features of biologic agents that influence their use as weapons. So their infectivity rates, their virulence rates, their toxicity rates, the incubation period, the transmissibility, the lethality of them, and the stability of them as well. So like human body cells, they have an internal cytoplasm surrounded by a rigid cell wall. Unlike human body cells, they lack the organized nucleus and other intracellular structures. Examples of these would be anthrax, cholera, plague, Q fever, and tularemia. Toxins, these are chemical compounds produced by living organisms. They're not typically volatile and do not replicate. So botulinum, ricin, staphylococcal enterotoxin B, and trichothysene mycotoxins, or T2. Viruses, these are the simplest microorganisms. They have an obligatory intracellular parasite that replicates only inside the host cells. They are not easy to manufacture in large quantities, so smallpox, encephalitis, and viral hemorrhagic fevers as well. Radioactive and nuclear devices. Potential scenarios would be a military nuclear device, improvised nuclear device, or a radiological dispersal device, or a dirty bomb, and then also sabotage to something that is already there. Effects of radiation, so it's going to have effects on the bone marrow, which is where blood is made. The GI system, you're going to have GI system upset, so you're going to have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all those things. And then central nervous system as well. Your parasympathetic nervous system is going to go haywire and give you all the signs and symptoms of a nerve agent. Incendiary devices, these use more plausible than the use of nuclear devices. They're not hard to obtain or initiate items, and specialized teams such as bomb squads generally are available to deal with these incendiary devices. I mean, honestly, you can go make any kind of bomb out of most of the things that you have in your house. So it's anything. Blast injury patterns, so you can have some lung injury with bradycardia, apnea, and hypotension from the blast wave. You can have a ruptured or tympanic membrane for an ear injury. In the abdomen, you're going to have some ruptured or gas-containing sections of the intestines. Brain injuries, you're going to have concussions or mild TBI from the blast wave. You can also have that coup contra coup injuries. Treatment is no different from the treatment from any other thermal or blast injury. and just also follow protocol. Strategy and tactics. So our ERG provides information for the most common terrorist weapons, broad general plans designed to achieve the desired outcome. And then tactics would be specific operational actions responders take to accomplish assigned tasks. Isolation, so initial considerations, controlling the scene, isolating the hazard, and attempting to conduct a controlled evacuation is resource intensive and requires law enforcement personnel as well. You want to establish a perimeter control. Law enforcement must establish that control perimeter throughout the incident. So some control factors for the perimeter: the amount and type of resources on hand, the capability of available resources, the ability of those resources to self-protect, size, configuration of the incident, and the stability of the scene. Notification, so generally required by established directives, procedures, and statutes. Requests for additional specialized agencies is carried out by Communications Center based on our reports from the scene. Identification, so we want to observe any kind of indicators of a particular agent or presence of chemical containers or lab materials. Consult your ERG. Protection, you can use people, or you want to not use people for protection, but you want to make sure that you protect people, vehicles, and equipment and supplies. Make an initial scene size up to determine any kind of security threats. Request protection, and establish a vehicle staging and triage treatment areas in protected locations. Advise EMS command about any kind of protection or security concerns. Immediately report suspicious people or activities as well. Decon, I'm not going to get a whole lot into this, but gross decon is removing surface contamination via mechanical means and an initial rinsing. The amount of surface contamination is significantly reduced. Self-protection at terrorist event. So protect yourself first. Scene size up and situational awareness. Patients displaying signs or hazardous substance exposure. Is that are there any unconscious patients or any patients exhibiting any kind of sludge M signs, blistering, reddening of the skin, discoloration, or skin irritation? Maybe your patient is having some difficulty breathing. Consider if there is any evidence of the following: so medical mass casualties or fatalities with minimal or no trauma, responder casualties as well, dead animals on vegetation, unusual odors, color of smoke, or any kind of vapor clouds. So how do we protect ourselves? We want to recognize the possible terrorist event. We've gone through auto, so occupancy or location, the type of event, timing, and any on-scene clues. Okay. Don't rush in. Wait until the appropriate authority says the scene is safe. Follow your incident command protocols. Wear appropriate PPE. Just be aware of possible explosive devices or booby traps, and search all patients for explosives or weapons. Understand your trace MP harms. So time. Also understand your time, distancing, and shielding. Your chemical harm is the primary harm at a chemical incident, and at a biological incident, it's going to be your etiological harm. So at a radiological incident, it's going to be your radiological harm is primary, and then at an explosive incident, you're going to have thermal and mechanical harms. Resources. So there is a strategic national stockpile that has a stockpile of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies to be used when the local resources are used up. I believe this is there are several different places, and we actually got into them with COVID. So we started using PPE out of those stockpiles. and even some medications out of those stockpiles because we were having shortages of them. So future trends, we're always need to be aware of what can be used and how it's used and what can be harm. So active shooters, mass shooting incidents, cyber terrorism, use of drugs or abuse of as chemical weapons. So I mean, you walk into a meth lab and it could be a chemical um, or mechanical type of incident because we've got chemicals and we've got that are very highly explosive. So meth labs could turn into um, not necessarily a terrorist incident, but they can turn into a major incident if we're not careful. Um, so if you have any questions, let me know, and I will answer those to the best of my ability.